Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The bell had just rung, and Professor Levant's class was settling into its usual hubbub. Levant, in his 40s, with graying hair and a piercing gaze, liked to impose his presence from the first moment. His reputation preceded him, rigid, arrogant, and of a severity that chilled even the most reckless. 16-year-old Jamal was a quiet, discreet student, always focused on his notebooks. Black, intelligent, but self-effacing, he went unnoticed by most teachers, except for Levant. That morning, a simple mistake in a math exercise was enough to unleash the teacher's fury. "Jamal," he snapped, pointing with military rigidity. "How can you write such nonsense? Everyone can see you don't understand anything." The laughter of his classmates echoed, embarrassed, amused, or frightened. Jamal lowered his head, clenching his fists on his notebook. His cheeks heated, but he said nothing. Levant, however, savored every second of this humiliation, unaware that his arrogance was about to backfire on him. A few weeks later, the teacher presented a complex problem to the class, hoping to trick the weaker students. Jamal, focused, took the time to analyze every detail. Then, calmly, he proposed a solution. Not only was it correct, but it far exceeded the teacher's explanation. His logic was clear, his demonstration elegant and profound. A deathly silence filled the room. Levant's eyes widened. How could a student he had despised surpass him like this? For the first time, he felt the dizziness of humility. His arrogance, until then his weapon, turned against him. Jamal, however, looked up and stared at his teacher, without hatred or arrogance, just a quiet confidence that shook all Levant's certainties. That day, Levant understood a simple but difficult truth: intelligence and respect cannot be commanded, they are revealed. And sometimes, they come from those we believe to be inferior. The classroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and the rustling of pages. Jamal sat in the back, calmly watching Professor Levant write complex equations on the board. "Jamal." The teacher's voice cracked the air like a clap of thunder. "Come here. Show me what you wrote for this exercise." The young boy stood up slowly, his notebook clutched to his chest. Every student held their breath. Levant quickly scanned the sheet and burst out, "This is ridiculous. You don't understand anything about what you're doing. How dare you present this in front of the class?" Jamal looked down. I thought." "You thought?" The teacher sneered. "We don't think in math, Jamal. We apply logic. But apparently, that's beyond you." The stifled laughter of his classmates echoed through the room. Jamal felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he remained silent. Later, during the surprise weekend test, Levant presented a complex problem designed to trap those he considered weak. He watched Jamal with a satisfied smile, convinced that the young boy would fail. When Jamal raised his hand to explain his solution, the whole class froze. "No, wait, you mean..." Levant began, confused. Jamal detailed each step with implacable logic, reasoning that the professor himself hadn't considered. "That's right, and you even found a simpler way than I had anticipated," Levant stammered, unable to hide his astonishment. Silence reigned for several seconds. Then, a murmur ran through the class, "He's right." Levant felt his pride crumble. Jamal, however, remained calm, looking at the professor with serenity. No triumphant smile, no arrogance, just the quiet confidence of one who knows. For Levant, it was a moment of truth. He had just understood that his arrogance had blinded him, and that the humility he so despised was sometimes the greatest strength. The next day, Levant entered the classroom with a slight nervousness. The memory of Jamal's demonstration still haunted him. He knew his reputation was shattered, and he felt everyone's eyes on him. "Open your notebooks, everyone," he said in a more measured voice, trying to regain his authority. But deep down, he knew he could no longer humiliate Jamal without consequences. Jamal, sitting quietly in the back, looked up and met the professor's gaze. A small, imperceptible smile touched his lips. Levant looked away. Today we're going to revisit yesterday's problem, Levant said, trying to mask his discomfort. And I want everyone to participate. Especially Jamal. Show us again how you see the solution. A heavy silence fell over the class. Jamal stood calmly and began his explanation again, detailing each step. But this time, Levant listened attentively, taking notes in his corner. He was beginning to understand. Jamal wasn't just intelligent, he had a way of thinking that expanded his own vision. When Jamal finished, Levant took a deep breath. All right. Jamal, you did something I didn't expect. Your logic is impressive. The class murmured in surprise. Jamal simply nodded modestly. Levant continued, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. I must admit that I was too hard on you, and I understand now that I have a lot to learn, even from my students. Jamal smiled a genuine smile. Thank you, Professor. I'm not trying to outdo you. I just want to understand and help the class. That day, Levant realized that true respect cannot be commanded, it must be earned. And for the first time, he felt the urge to become a teacher who inspires, rather than one who intimidates. The following week, Levant entered the classroom with a slight smile. He had never imagined feeling this mixture of nervousness and curiosity around a student. But something about Jamal intrigued him deeply. Today we're going to work in pairs, he announced. Jamal, you'll be my assistant for this exercise. I want you to explain how you approach this type of problem. A murmur rippled through the class. Jamal nodded calmly and stepped forward. The other students watched, half surprised, half envious. Okay, let's get started, Levant said, trying to hide his apprehension. As they worked together at the board, Jamal patiently explained each step, each line of reasoning. Levant listened attentively, asking questions, sometimes tricky, sometimes sincere. And each time, Jamal came up with a clear and logical answer, without ever mocking him. It's fascinating, Levant murmured quietly, more to himself than to the student. You have a way of seeing things that I had never considered. Jamal shrugged modestly. I just think sometimes you just have to look at it differently. By the end of the hour, Levant felt an inner transformation. The admiration he had initially withheld from Jamal was mingled with a realization he had much to learn, not only about mathematics, but also about respect and humility. As the class emptied, Levant called Jamal over. Listen. I'd like to continue working with you on these problems. Not in front of the class, just you and me. What do you think? Jamal smiled. My pleasure, Professor. I think we can learn a lot from each other. For the first time, Levant left the room with a feeling he had never known, the pride of learning, alongside a student who had challenged him not out of arrogance, but out of intelligence and integrity. Word spread quickly through the class. Jamal was now working directly with Professor Levant, one-on-one. Some students, who had previously ignored or mocked him, began to cast envious glances and whisper among themselves. So, little Jamal is becoming the teacher's pet, a student muttered sarcastically to his neighbor. Jamal sat calmly and said nothing. He knew that showing arrogance would only make the situation worse. Levant, for his part, felt a strange mixture, pride, but also tension. He knew that some colleagues and students viewed this relationship negatively. Yet he refused to let his ego and the opinions of others dictate his actions. Jamal, let's take this problem, Levant said during their private session, placing a particularly complex exercise on the desk. I want you to show me your approach before I try anything. Jamal leaned over the paper, thinking. I believe that by first analyzing the main constraints, and then simplifying certain steps, we can solve the problem more efficiently. Levant nodded, impressed. Right. You always find solutions I hadn't even considered. But jealousy began to rise among the other students. Some began to copy Jamal, others to openly criticize him. A confrontation was inevitable. Why do you think you're superior, Jamal? A student suddenly called out in class. The teacher doesn't need your help. Jamal looked up calmly, without anger. I don't think I'm superior. I just want to understand and learn. Levant intervened, his voice firm, leave him alone. Here, everyone has the right to learn in their own way. It's not a question of superiority. A heavy silence fell over the class. The whispers died down, but the atmosphere remained tense. Jamal understood that earning respect meant not only succeeding, but also navigating the jealousy and prejudice of others. This chapter marked a turning point. Jamal and Levant's collaboration was no longer just an academic apprenticeship, but also a lesson in courage, resilience, and mutual respect in the face of criticism. A few weeks later, Levant announced a challenge to the class, a particularly complex problem, known to have failed many students the previous year. He knew Jamal would be able to solve it, but he wanted to see how far he could go. This time, I want everyone to try the problem alone, Levant said, his eyes fixed on Jamal. And may the best man win. A murmur rippled through the class. The other students already knew they stood virtually no chance against Jamal. But some, driven by pride, refused to be intimidated. Jamal sat down, focused. His mind analyzed every detail, every possibility. Levant, for his part, felt a strange nervousness. He knew Jamal was going to shine, but he also wanted to prove that he could still hold his own as a teacher. After a few minutes, Jamal raised his hand. Professor, I've found two different solutions. One follows the classic method, the other is faster and more logical. Levant took a deep breath and examined the work. Jamal had not only solved the problem, but had also found a solution Levant had never considered. The professor felt a mixture of wonder and humility. That's incredible, Levant murmured. You just showed me something I didn't know, and I admit you've outdone me. The other students fell silent, some shocked, others admiring. Jealousy turned to respect. Jamal, modest, replied simply, "Thank you, Professor. But I think you taught me a lot too." Levant smiled, sincerely this time. "Yes, and I think we both grew from this experience. You reminded me why teaching is also about learning." That day, the dynamic in the classroom changed forever. Jamal was no longer just a brilliant student, he was an example of resilience, calm, and insight. And Levant, for the first time, understood that a teacher doesn't dominate his students, he guides them and learns with them. A few days after the final challenge, the class seemed transformed. The jealous murmurs and mocking whispers had given way to a general respect for Jamal. Even the most skeptical students were beginning to recognize his intelligence and patience. Levant entered the classroom with a new calm. He was no longer the arrogant professor who sought to impress or intimidate. He understood that true teaching came through dialogue and listening. "Today we're going to review some advanced concepts," he announced. "And this time, I'd like everyone to contribute their ideas. Jamal, you can start." Jamal stood up and explained a difficult concept clearly and simply. The other students took notes, some asking questions they would never have dared to ask before. Levant watched them with satisfaction. After class, a small group of students approached Jamal. "You're really impressive, and the teacher has changed because of you." Jamal shrugged modestly. "We learn every day, not just at school. Sometimes you just have to look at things differently." Levant, who was putting his things away at his desk, listened to them with a smile. He knew the dynamics of his class had changed, but more importantly, he felt his own transformation. "Jamal," he called, "thank you. You taught me more than any textbook or training course. You reminded me why I chose this profession." Jamal smiled. "And you taught me that a teacher can be a mentor, not just a judge." For Levant, this experience was a revelation. Humility, respect, and curiosity are not optional qualities, but the foundation of true teaching. And for Jamal, it was confirmation that intelligence and patience can change not only his own life, but also the lives of those around him. The school's administration had announced a special academic competition. Each class was to present a complex project to a jury of professors and external guests. Levant knew this was Jamal's chance to shine, but also to demonstrate that their collaboration had paid off. Jamal, this time you will have to present the project in front of everyone, Levant said as he entered the room. I trust you to guide the class. Jamal nodded, calm but focused. The other students, previously jealous or skeptical, were now motivated and ready to work together. On the day of the presentation, the main room was packed. The students were nervous, but Jamal stood tall and confident. Levant, by his side, felt a pride he had never felt before. When Jamal took the floor, he explained each step of the project clearly and precisely, while engaging his classmates. He answered the judges' questions with confidence, demonstrating not only his understanding but also his ability to guide and inspire others. At the end of the presentation, a respectful silence filled the room, followed by loud applause. The judges were impressed, and even the most critical students in the class recognized Jamal's worth and the teacher's transformation. Levant turned to him and whispered, "You showed me what it means to be a true leader, and a true student." Jamal smiled modestly. "And you taught me that a teacher can learn from his students." That day, Levant fully understood that teaching was not about domination, but about sharing and humility. Jamal, for his part, had proven that patience, intelligence, and modesty could transform even the most closed hearts. The class left the room to applause, and Levant felt a new emotion, the pride of those who dared to change and the certainty that true success lies in mutual learning. The weeks following the competition left a profound impression on the school. Jamal's reputation had changed dramatically. He was no longer just the quiet boy at the back of the class, but a beacon of intelligence, patience, and leadership. Students came to him for advice, and even those who had once mocked him sought to learn from him. Levant, for his part, had become a transformed teacher. He no longer sought to intimidate or dominate his students, but to guide them and stimulate their curiosity. His relationship with Jamal had opened his eyes to a simple but essential truth: teaching is an exchange, and humility is the key to all success. One morning, as the class prepared for a new set of projects, Levant watched Jamal help a group of students solve a complex problem. He smiled, silently recognizing the student he had once humiliated, who now guided him as much as he guided the class. "You know," Levant said, standing up in front of the class, "what we learned together wasn't just about math or science. We learned to listen, to respect, and to share our knowledge. Jamal reminded me that everyone has something to contribute, no matter where they come from." The students listened attentively, some nodding, others smiling shyly. Levant's lesson was not only academic, but humane. Later that day, Jamal approached him. "Professor, thank you for your trust, and for changing." Levant placed his hand on the student's shoulder and replied, "No, Jamal. Thank you. You taught me that greatness is not measured by authority, but by the ability to learn and inspire." The entire school felt this transformation. Teachers began to rethink their teaching methods, and students understood that respect and intelligence cannot be commanded, they are earned through example and perseverance. Thus, what began as a humiliation turned into a lasting lesson, affecting not only one teacher and one student, but the entire school community. A few months later, the school held a ceremony to recognize the year's most outstanding projects. Levant's class was naturally invited to present the work of Jamal and his classmates. When Jamal took the stage to explain the project, Levant felt a deep emotion. He was no longer the boy he had humiliated a few months earlier, he was a leader, respected and admired by all. The jury president, impressed by the presentation, addressed the class. "This work demonstrates not only great intellectual mastery, but also a spirit of collaboration and respect. Congratulations to all. And especially to Jamal, for his exemplary role." Applause echoed throughout the room. Jamal smiled modestly and inclined his head. Levant, his eyes moist, climbed up to his side. "Jamal," he whispered, "you've taught me more than I ever imagined. I'm proud of you." Jamal replied calmly, "And I, Professor, am grateful that you were able to change. Thank you for listening to me and guiding me." At that moment, Levant fully understood that true success lay not in grades or results, but in how teaching and learning can transform lives. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation. The students, teachers, and guests had witnessed a lesson in humility, courage, and respect. Jamal and Levant had changed not only themselves, but their entire community. That day, everyone left the room with a new conviction: learning, teaching, and respect are forces capable of transforming the world, one student and one teacher at a time. In the following months, school life returned to normal, but nothing was the same. Jamal continued to excel academically, while guiding his classmates with patience and modesty. He had become an example of perseverance and intelligence for all. Levant, on the other hand, now taught with a completely different approach. He no longer used fear to impose his authority, but rather trust and encouragement. His students respected him deeply, and he felt a newfound satisfaction, that of seeing his students grow and flourish. One morning, Levant watched Jamal help a group of students solve a particularly complex problem. He smiled to himself. The boy he had humiliated a few months earlier had become not only a brilliant student, but a natural leader. "Jamal," Levant said, approaching, "you reminded me why I chose this profession. Teaching isn't just about imparting knowledge, it's about inspiring, learning, and growing with them." Jamal looked up and replied, "And you showed me that a real teacher doesn't just correct mistakes, he knows how to learn from his students." Levant nodded. Together, they knew this experience had changed their lives forever. Jamal had learned to trust his intelligence and patience, and Levant had learned humility, respect, and the value of true mentorship. As the sun rose over the school, a sense of renewal hung in the air. The lessons learned this year would continue to inspire other students and teachers, and Jamal and Levant's story would remain an example of what intelligence, humility, and collaboration can accomplish. The classroom, the school, and even the teacher were transformed. And for Jamal and Levant, this was just the beginning of a promising future, where learning and teaching would never be the same again.